Welcome back to Season 2 of Inside the Vault, Enterprise Bank's podcast series. As you know, education and awareness of issues affecting the small business community is an important part of the bank's relationship and consulting-oriented approach with its clients. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to review and rate us on all of your popular podcast platforms. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at insidethevault@enterprisebankpgh.com. So I'm sitting down today with Kevin Shivers, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Association for Community Bankers, to talk about an emerging industry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the medical marijuana industry. And today's conversation is entitled Let's Be Blunt, play on words, obviously, about what's going on in the industry, and in particular, what some of the issues have been with the industry using the traditional banking system. But before I get into the discussion about cannabis-related banking, Kevin, can you give us a little background on who PACB is and your role there?
Absolutely. Dave, thank you for inviting me to come inside the vault and to talk with you about these issues. The Pennsylvania Association of Community Bankers represents community banks across Pennsylvania. A typical bank in our membership has about $500 million in assets. The distinction with a community bank, as you have been telling your viewers, is that these are local deposits that are then used locally to support private enterprise, to support home ownership, to support charitable work. And it's really about a culture. If there's a distinction between large banks and small banks, it's about that culture of giving back. So I have the greatest job in the world, where I have a chance to come out and meet some incredible bank leaders, people that are doing really incredible work in their communities. Enterprise Bank, you have such a proud track record of providing and supporting entrepreneurial dreams, and in addition to that, supporting your local community. And you should be credited for the great work that all of your team does.
Greatly appreciated. Thanks for the kudos. We try.
Yeah.
And that's why this particular topic was of interest to us, because as you know, and our viewers know, we deal almost exclusively with small businesses. And we have a already pretty significant portion of our small business market involved, even in an indirect way, in many cases, with the cannabis industry. And our hands have been somewhat tied in terms of what we can do to assist them in the way that we assist, our normal small business clientele, because of some of the firewalls and issues that we're going to talk about today. But before we get into the discussion, I wanted to give our viewers kind of an idea what the scope of the industry is in Pennsylvania and what the climate is right now. So, just turned 2022. So Pennsylvania is really kind of in its sixth year of the whole involvement with the industry. And it was 2016 that it was signed into legislation at the state level.
And for a moment, if I could, Dave, and just interrupt you, I was at the Capitol when this historic legislation was enacted. And this was really about giving patients all of the tools that they needed to improve their quality of life. Whether you're suffering from cancer, whether you were suffering from depression, whether you were suffering from, a malady that, cannabis could help to improve your quality of life, whether it gave you an appetite to be able to eat after the chemo treatments, whether you were able to take a medication that would prevent seizures. And, so we're not talking here in Pennsylvania about opening the floodgate on recreational marijuana. We're talking about a drug. And, this, I think, was a historic step at the time that Pennsylvania took to allow for the medical use of marijuana. We now have 42 states in the country who have some type of law. But, yeah, this is where the challenge that you're talking about hits is, you've created as the government an industry to support a medication, but there are a whole lot of complications now as a result of the difference between federal and state law.
And I think we do lose sight of that anytime you start talking about marijuana or cannabis. Everybody snickers and you do clever subtitles like we're doing for this podcast episode. But, at the core, at the state level right now, this is about medication.
That's right.
for health concerns. So, the industry has just grown significantly. So I mentioned 2016, everything was pretty much legislated to get through the licensing and all those qualifications and process. I think it was 2018 when the first dispensaries opened. And I pulled some recent statistics. There's 131 dispensaries operating in the state right now. There are 30 grower facilities involved in the state. But what I wasn't able to find, but what we see anecdotally here at Enterprise, is a huge number of businesses that complement the industry.
Indeed.
And some of those are exclusive complements or exclusive suppliers to the industry, whether they be software providers, whether they be transportation services, whatever they may be, or regular small businesses that saw this as a market opportunity that have started to serve the industry. And again, the challenges are there.
And that's really hard to even fathom for some consumers. You only see the retail end when you walk into a store and you purchase a product, but you don't realize everything that goes into it. And we're now facing it in our society. We're dealing with supply chain issues for a variety of products and services, but it really points out the challenges that it takes to take a product to market, because in addition to that retail outlet, you have to have somebody to be able to deliver it. You have to have somebody to be able to grow it. You have to have somebody to package it. You have all of the financial software that you need to account for it and administer to keep track of your inventory. So it's not like you can just turn a switch and an industry is up and running. As you pointed out, it takes several years to be able to make that happen.
And just the impact from the employee perspective, approximately 16,000 individuals in the state of Pennsylvania working directly for the dispensaries, growers, and the businesses that have been identified as related to the industry. Huge economic impact, particularly for workers who can only get paid in cash right now. That's right. So one of the other interesting statistics that I found was the average, the sales volume. We're approaching or to have approached $1 billion in annual sales in 2021, with growth projections by 2025 of $2 billion in annual sales. And I thought this was interesting. Might say something about our population in PA. We have one of the largest average tickets of consumer purchases at our dispensaries. $123 average order. We're talking about significant dollars here. And that's translated into significant cash and nowhere for it to be put.
That's right.
So, which is really what we want to talk about today. So to kind of start it off, and you're probably in the best position to describe this, what is the current issue that's creating this barrier between the traditional banking system and the cannabis industry?
Yeah, sure. For your consumers, and, you've talked about this in the vault previously, we have federal and state laws that prevent the bad guys from using banks and our financial system to be able to transact business that's illegal, right? We have set up rules in our country to prevent money laundering for sex trafficking, for prostitution, for drug trafficking, gambling, illegal activity, organized crime. And we did that. It makes sense, right? I mean, we don't want the bad guys to leverage the power of the American economy for nefarious purposes. And more so after 9/11, where we found that, the bad guys were laundering money through our banks, our financial systems, for purposes to destroy our country. And so there are a whole host of laws at the federal and state level that put the onus on banks to make sure that the money that is deposited here in your institution and in others is clean, that it comes from legal purposes and that illegal purposes are not supported by our financial industry. Well, there's the trouble, because under federal law, the cannabis and marijuana is still illegal. It's still considered under federal law to be a criminal enterprise. And so then the question is, how do you as a bank be able to transact business for a market that was created by government? Here in Pennsylvania, the state government said that there are medicinal purposes that are ethical and that are valuable for patients in our state, and highly regulated. And so we want to make those available. And as a result, they created an opportunity for entrepreneurs and others to be able to build up that infrastructure. The problem is, technically under federal law, all of that is illegal. And so the frustration that we've heard from banks is, technically under the law, if you had a cannabis dispensary in a strip mall, technically the owner of the strip mall should have that loan pulled because they are allowing an illegal enterprise to do business in their dispensary at the federal level. If you work for a dispensary, how do you cash your paycheck? They're getting paid in cash right now. How do you get a home loan? You're working for a legitimate business, and you are providing a legally authorized product in Pennsylvania, but you are not allowed banking services because it's still illegal at the federal level. And why is that? Why can't a bank just go ahead and just start doing this business? Well, banks are regulated heavily, and that you are scrutinized year in and year out in making sure that you have the dollars on the books that you say you do, that you are transacting business the way you say you are, and that you're making sure that you have processes and systems in place, again, not to let the bad guys take advantage of our system. And that's where the challenge is. Because with all of that in place, it makes it awfully hard for Enterprise Bank or others to be willing to take the risk to be able to go out there and to do this type of business. And that's bad for the industry, right? Because the longer we delay in changing the law, the harder it is for this industry that has been authorized under government to provide this medical prescription to be able to get up and running. And that's not good for anybody, because one of the things in business, predictability and stability.
Yeah.
You need to have laws that can be followed, and you can actually conduct business in a way that there's no uncertainty. There's a whole lot of uncertainty right now.
Well, just from the practical perspective, I mean, we were involved early on when the investment dollars needed to be shown for the actual licensing by the state back soon after the legislation was passed. The amount of the process for the application and the background checks and the vetting for all the principals and any business relationships that they had were more than any loan underwriting I've ever seen. So, the due diligence is already being done by multiple agencies. It's just we have this state-federal issue. And you mentioned bank examiners and regulators. The two primary regulators for most banks are federal in nature, either the FDIC or the OCC. And then you've got, examiners at your state level that are saying this is okay, we're okay at the state, but at the federal level, we're still not.
That's right.
So, what obviously has been happening, and what I've heard anecdotally from talking to some of our clients that are involved in the cannabis industry, even though we can't deal with those businesses directly, is they found other ways to skin the cat. And those other ways are not necessarily the most efficient, secure, or allow them to really grow their businesses.
There are a lot of societal pitfalls by not allowing these businesses to be able to bank. And let's go all the way out to the retail one that the consumer faces, and that is the fact that it's an all cash business. So think about that. This is a prescription So this is the only drug that we, as citizens, can be prescribed by a doctor
where we have to pay cash for it. Like I can't use my card, my credit card to transact business. It's
restricted
because it's illegal at the federal level. So I have to use cash. Well, the business, they can't take that cash at the end of the day and put it in a bank because, again, it's illegal money from an illegal transaction, even though it's legal in our state. So you have huge, vaults, safes in these stores where they're keeping the cash during the day. Well, now you know where the cash is. So now you need to, so we've seen an increase in organized crime.
because these businesses need protection. You have individuals with sidearms, which in some cities is a problem, right? You can't bring a firearm into certain cities and certain communities, and who's trained to use those? And as well, we've seen a lot of the smash and grab crime. I just read an article where they were talking to one dispensary where the bad guys literally jackhammered the safe out of the floor and stole the safe to take with them. And not only that, people walking in and out, consumers who the bad guys know are walking into that store with a whole lot of cash, who are getting knocked off either before or after they go into the store, either for the cash before they go in or for the product when they're walking out.
And outside of the banking discussion, Kevin, how likely is it for law enforcement to really get involved in those scenarios when they're dealing with the same conundrum the banks are?
That's exactly right. So we think, any lawful business activity, those entrepreneurs should have available to them the banking services of our industry, because it just makes sense
That, we've said as a state that this is a lawful industry, and that, all work has value. And so if you work in that industry, you should be able to set up an account. You should be able to take a deposit of your paycheck. You should be able to get a home mortgage if you want to do that. You should be available, it should be available to you to do that. Likewise, we again talked a minute ago about that, the dispensary in the strip mall. Likewise, a plumber should not have any fear of retribution by going out to a call with a leaky pipe in a cannabis dispensary and fixing it, and now finding out that he was aiding and abetting a criminal enterprise. Now, again, those are extremes, but again, those extremes are in law. Those are the crimes that people are susceptible to. The times have changed, and so we need the federal government, or the state government, but definitely the federal government, to get with the times to be able to legalize a product that is now legal in 42 states.
Yeah. And, with regard to getting with the times, just look at the supply chains for these cannabis businesses. How many of those supply chains are set up to accept cash payments? It just puts wrinkles into the entire system,
and it forces the entire industry and the entire process, anybody who's in touch with it, to be illegal, even or subject to criminal activity. Even the federal government.
We did some research. We talked to some cannabis businesses, and we were finding out the way that they get around it was they overpay their taxes. So you're getting a lot of cash. You overpay your taxes. The federal government sends you back a refund check. Well, that money has now been laundered by the federal government has cleaned the money. Wild. And so now you take that U.S. Treasury check and you go to your bank and you can deposit it that way. Come on, people. Why are we doing this? There is a bank that I know who is in this industry. The federal government came to them and said, look, this particular business owner, this dispensary, they owe taxes. And so, we need you to cut the, we don't do, they gave them a special permit to allow them in this instance to be able to cash that check in order to pay the government the taxes that are owed. So we're going through all kinds of jujitsu with the law in order to allow for this activity to take place? The simple answer: just pass the law to allow for this type of business activity to take place.
You mentioned, a bank getting special dispensation. There are banks that aren't handling these, and quite honestly, I heard the credit union industry has stepped up to the plate in some instances to kind of fill the gap. But with regards to the banks themselves, the ones that are banking them have to basically file what's called a suspicious activity report, and banking lingo, SAR, with every transaction. Did a little research. 202,000 SARs needed to be filed by the banks that are dealing with these businesses right now. I can tell you a single SAR takes a lot of time, effort, and money for a bank to process. So it's creating this huge inefficiency at the banks themselves. And I know not everybody's sympathetic to banks, plight financially. But that gets translated into higher fees for the businesses that really are trying to use the established financial system.
Well, and to your point on the, for the consumers on the SARS reports, I mean, it's, the way we face it is, when we get cash, when we deposit that check and we don't understand why that money isn't in our account, right? I should be able to use that really big check. Well, guess what? And it's not the bank's fault. There are federal rules in place that say if there's a lot of money being transacted, we need, again, to make sure that it's, the bad guys aren't involved. And so that may be why it takes a little bit of time before the check that you deposited in your account takes time to clear, because that due diligence has to be done.
Right.
We bought a house several years ago, and I moved money from one account in another institution to this one. Well, that took some time, and now representing this industry, Dave, I can say I feel bad, because obviously I forced somebody to fill out some paperwork, when we made that transaction. But that's why we've been advocating as an association. Again, we represent community banks. Why do they care about this issue? Well, because, over half of all business loans in this country, small business loans in particular, almost 70%, are transacted through a community bank.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, right? We talked about it at the top of the hour. There is an intrinsic relationship between the community banks that are located in communities all across the Commonwealth and the businesses that work in those communities. The CEO at the bank, he's probably the coach of the Little League team, or, maybe supportive of the local United Way or other charity, or maybe be involved in a house of worship locally. Same with the business people in that community. So there is a trust level that has been established. That banker knows the individual. So when a business owner, an entrepreneur wants to start a business, maybe there are some issues that a big bank might ignore that loan, but the small business may be allowed the loan at their local community bank because of the relationship that those local lenders have with those borrowers. They're willing to take that risk. That's why it's so important that we change the law to allow this activity. And that my organization, we've been advocating at the federal level. We call it the Safe Banking Act.
That's a good saying.
And the Safe Banking Act would provide, we call it a safe harbor for those banks who do business with the individuals who support the cannabis industry. So in Pennsylvania, those cannabis-related businesses that are part of the medical marijuana dispensary system and supporting that industry, they would be able to benefit from banking services, and that they would not be at risk. More importantly, the banks would not be at risk for banking them, even though it's still illegal at the federal level. Like, this legislation does not change that conversation. All it says is that real commercial activity, legitimate commercial activity, is allowed. And again, there are provisions. There's oversight. Again, as you pointed out, the SARS, the due diligence isn't going to go away. But there is, a bank would not be penalized by an examiner. And that's another challenge that we have is, many of the examiners have a lot of latitude in the issues that they are grading and the enforcement and the oversight. This would create a standard level of oversight of this type of activity, which we think would provide a level of surety, stability that we were talking about, predictability, that more banks would be involved in supporting the industry. Because again, with this uncertainty, with the unpredictability, with this all cash system, it really is hard for the cannabis industry to be able to support patients in our state. Allowing banking of those services can provide surety to patients to know that their prescriptions are going to continue.
So what is the status of that legislation? I understand it passed the House back in 2019, still hasn't been addressed by the Senate.
I tell you, Dave, you titled this segment, Let's Be Blunt. Talking about the legislation, we might want to title this segment Up in Smoke. Because really that's what's happened. And what is striking about that is every time this legislation has come up for a vote, there have been even more supporters, but yet we still can't get it across the finish line.
And it's a victim of its own success, in my opinion. There's federal legislation. It's been introduced by a representative, Ed Perlmutter from Colorado, who, again, Colorado has sort of been the leader in this industry, but that would, again, provide the safe harbor. Here in Pennsylvania, this legislation has been supported by federal members of both parties, Congressman Boyle, Cartwright, Dean, Doyle, Evans, Houlihan, Connor Lamb in this area has been supportive as well, Guy Reschenthaler, and as well
Dan Muser, Susan Wild, Congressman Scanlon. So there is broad bipartisan support for this legislation.
What they're doing, Kevin, is they're representing the interests of the thoughts of their constituents. I was doing some background research for this discussion today,
And we're at an all-time high in terms of public sentiment. 68% of U.S. adults favor legalization of marijuana, and only 10% of U.S. adults are against any form of marijuana legalization, even medical. That's the vast majority of the public wants this.
Absolutely right. And I think representatives realize that, and especially in a state like Pennsylvania, where again state law has authorized it, and we've now seen industry develop in order to support it, the supply chain and all of the other industry supports that we've talked about. And so those representatives realize that they need to step in order to continue this, to be able to continue to make this work. Again, predictability, stability. And so, but the challenge is there are a couple of challenges. There's a much broader debate happening in Washington for a more comprehensive reform of marijuana laws, not only relating to this particular piece relating to banking, but as well to allow for broad legalization of recreational use or other. But as well, there is a criminal justice reform component about you have people who have criminal records who have served their time and can't get a job because of this. Even while we're now making it legal in states, these people still have this albatross hung around their neck. And so there are some legitimate reasons to do some of those other criminal justice reforms. And I think the challenge that we're seeing, or at least what Congressman Perlmutter has said, is that there is there's a concern in Washington, I think, that if we do this, if we allow for the banking of cannabis, then we won't be able to get any of these other reforms done. And Congressman Perlmutter makes a great point, and he says this can be the icebreaker, that we can do this, demonstrate that this is a legitimate industry, then we can have those other conversations. And it's created broad bipartisan support. Even senators like Elizabeth Warren, who maybe has not been as favorable or has scrutinized the banking industry, let's say, recognizes the value of the cannabis industry because it's legal in her state, and recognizes the importance of having banking services available to the industry for the challenges that I mentioned. Again, the problem right now is the hang up over this broader reform, which is preventing this one piece to get done. If you remember, and the viewers, some of them old enough to remember that old "I'm Just a Bill" cartoon, it's that bill in action. It's that commercial in action where you have to get a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate to do it. What's extraordinary, Dave, is there were 321 members who voted in favor of this legislation in the U.S. House this last summer. That's out of 435. That's a really strong number. Broad bipartisan support. And in the Senate, we've heard that there is broad bipartisan support as well. So you would think if this came up for a vote, there would be well over the 60 senators who would be needed to support this between Republicans and Democrats. But again, the fear is that if this is passed, it won't allow a pathway for the other things to pass. Well, that's bad. In my opinion, that's bad public policy. Let's get the pieces done and let the public policy evolve with public sentiment. As you said, the polling clearly shows public attitudes are changing on this issue. But you know what? Let's not sacrifice the industry. Let's not sacrifice safety, by preventing this piece of the legislation to happen.
And my understanding is a little bit more urgency recently with Perlmutter himself, which considered one of the champions of reform in this area, is not running for reelection.
It's interesting. Following his comments, he even went so far as to try and amend his language for the Safe Banking Act into larger pieces of legislation. Technically, they call them omnibus legislation. One of those was the National Defense Authorization Act, and you're like, how can you do that? That's a story for another show in the vault. But in any event, he was successful in having this amended into that in the House, but it was removed in the Senate, or not addressed in the Senate, for the issues that I've mentioned. And he was very frustrated. There clearly is a desire to fix the banking side, and there are real consumer protection reasons to do that. And he went so far, the congressman, to say, I might hold up something that somebody else really wants to in order to get this done. That's unfortunately the way Washington works. But what's interesting is that the congressman has announced he's not running for re-election. So there really isn't any reason why he could hold back. So there, he, as in the articles that I've read, has already had conversation with the speaker about what are the things that the Senate wants that are going to be coming back over for consideration in the U.S. House. And I think he's keeping his powder dry now, but I'm sure he's identified a couple of pieces that they really want in an effort to insert this. Now, at the state level, Dave, our association and the industry has said, look, this type of uncertainty we can't continue any longer. If the state government has authorized us to allow for medical cannabis, the banking system needs to be involved, and we need to make sure that we do this in a proper way and one that protects consumers. So my association is looking at a state level law that would provide the same protections, the same safe banking protections to banks in Pennsylvania that are transacting this business. We're using we're actually using the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. We're hanging our hat legislatively on that states' rights provision within the Constitution, and we're following the lead of some other states. California was the first that when they legalized, they legalized marijuana through policy white paper, if you will, years ago. And then a number of states followed, like Colorado and others. Eventually, Colorado codified it, and as well California, to allow for this type of activity. So we followed what happened in California, and then we reached out to the regulators at the state level in California and as well to some banks to find out, well, how is this being viewed? Are you being harassed by federal regulators? Are examiners providing undue scrutiny? What are you seeing? Are people honoring the state level protection? And we found in the places that have done this, by and large, they have. And again, if you're doing things legitimately, that you have due diligence and you have proper protocols in place to do this, then you're actually creating a strong consumer protection. So we're working in the legislature. We're actually working with all the financial groups. You mentioned the credit unions earlier. We're talking with the large bank trade associations. We're talking with the cannabis industry as well as law enforcement. And we're working with the district attorneys associations and others. We think we need to be transparent about this process. And again, the desire is public protection, not only to protect the money system, protect the rights of entrepreneurs who are in this industry, protect the supply chain, protect consumers. We think this is a good consumer protection issue. So we'll see. We're working with lawmakers at the state level. We've had conversations with legislative leadership. We've had conversations with the Wolf administration. So we're hopeful. And the other idea behind this is that if Pennsylvania, a state, would enact a state law, the hope is that would create more pressure on the federal government to fix this at the federal level. Ultimately, it needs to be fixed at the federal level. But if the 42 states who have authorized the sale of cannabis in some way take this similar initiative, it's going to force the hand of the federal government to act as well. And so we think that that's good public policy.
So what can our listeners, primarily small business owners, what can they do to advance the cause, either at the federal or the state level or both?
Sure. You can visit our website, PACB.org, where we have information available about cannabis and safe banking. And we would encourage them, your viewers and listeners, to contact your state representatives. In particular, if you are a patient who is receiving medical cannabis for whatever malady that you have, it's really important for you to have that conversation with your state representative or your state senator, even your member of Congress, to say, look, I need certainty. I need a guarantee that I will have access. That's exactly right. Because you know what? I can't imagine the fear that someone might face, particularly now, walking into a dispensary and having everybody who's staring at you know that you're walking in there with a wad of cash in order to pay for a legally authorized medication that's been prescribed to you. So I think it's important for citizens to get engaged and to continue the pressure. The positive, the optimist in me, we've seen a significant growth in the support of this legislation at the federal level. And I have to say, I've been very pleased in the conversations at the state level with legislative leaders as well, conservatives and liberals, because they recognize Pennsylvania has authorized this and recognize they created a marketplace. They need to create the commerce system to transact business. Right. So this is definitely top of mind for lawmakers.
And you brought up a point that we'll end on. You brought up a point a little while ago. This isn't money-hungry bankers trying to create a new market. I mean, our experience here at Enterprise has been we've had long-term established small business customers that now are serving the industry or have become involved in the industry directly, and we can't serve our existing clientele. It's not about necessarily creating a new profit center for the bank. It's doing what community banks do, which is taking care of our market, our community, and servicing our clients.
And I got to tell you, the bank CEOs that I've talked to, when you ask them what's top of mind that's keeping you up at night, one of the issues that they talk about are their retail businesses that are putting new products on the shelves that have CBD or other, and thinking, am I supporting an illegal enterprise because there is no surety in existing law that allows them to be able to do that. And so, again, we need to move forward. We created this market. We need to create the commerce system. We need a federal law to do this. Congress needs to act. And if they're not going to act, we need to address it at the state level.
Well, thank you very much for all the work that you personally and the PACB does on behalf of community banks and the communities that we serve. I'm sure there's plenty of other topics that we could talk about in relationship to community banking and its effect in small business markets like ours.
Anytime you want to bring me back into the vault, I'd love to come. Yeah.
And we'll be blunt every time. Thanks, folks.